Okay, so here we are again. This is how your BIOS, the default screen, will look like. There's different things that you can look into. The MIT motherboard intelligent tweaker, that's what the Gigabyte BIOS calls it. It's actually where all the overclocking takes place. So we'll go there later. These are your standard BIOS features. It'll tell you, you set your time here, and these are my CD and DVD ROMs and my 2 hard drives. These are some advanced features, like your priority on boot. If you wanted to boot from a CD or DVD, you would set it all in here. Or if you have like a floppy disk, I don't know why I have my floppy as my first priority. I'm gonna turn that off because I don't use floppy. Okay. These are your USB plugins, basically your keyboard and stuff like that. If you have a USB keyboard and mouse, I would recommend going to USB keyboard function here and keep that on enabled. It'll probably be disabled by default. Same with the mouse. So that way your keyboard works before you actually boot into Windows. Power management setup. Nothing here really to be changing. I would recommend to keep everything on default. PC health status. You can have basically your temperatures. These are the temperatures that your CPU temperatures, your system temperature, and basically to look at the fan speeds. I don't have any of my fans plugged in onto the motherboard plugs, but if I had, then it would show me the RPMs at which they're running. Basically everything on default as well in here. And the right side here is basically just for if you wanted to set your password, and when you're done you save and exit. You can also save your settings to BIOS. That means if you press F11, you can save it on one of these defaults, and then you can just load it. These are like your profiles. Okay, so I'm actually going to load my default setting. So I'm going to go press F12, load CMOS from BIOS, and I'm going to go, sorry about that, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to go for load optimized defaults. That will put everything to its default setting. Press Y for yes, and now it loaded the factory setting that your CPU will come with. When I go to the MIT, the overclocking tweak settings, first we see our CPU clock ratio. Now this is your multiplier here. Different CPUs will have different multipliers. The Core i7-920, which I'm using, has a default multiplier at 20, and that basically multiplies 20 times your BCLK, your base clock control frequency. Okay, so your base clock frequency times your multiplier equals your CPU frequency, which is right now by default at 2.6 gigahertz, 2600 megahertz. Okay, so I would recommend leaving this multiplier at default, which is 20. What you need to tweak, however, is if you go to these CPU advanced features, you want to disable all these power saving features that Intel has for overclocking, at least for when you're testing your system stability, and so you can see your voltages and everything just the way it is. So these settings I have here are pretty much the standard. You have to change them up a little bit. The turbo boost will go disabled. That basically clocks the multiplier by 1 and gives you a little boost, but we're not going to be needing that. We're overclocking. So multi-threading enabled. You want that enabled. C1E, you want that disabled. That's basically your if you're not using the monitor, I'm sorry, if you're not using the CPU as much, it will downclock itself, and it's basically a power saving feature. I tend to turn all of those off. Okay, so we can leave this, and now we're actually going to the overclocking. So now the Core i7 processors, they actually have a little bit different way to overclock than, for example, you know, the AMDs and the Q quad cores and dual cores, the Core 2 duos and the Core 2 quads. So they changed it up, and they actually made it a lot easier to overclock, I think. You have three things to look for. You have the QPI clock ratio, you have the encore and QPI frequency, and you have your base clock frequency. These are three things that you'll be changing. Well, also you'll be changing the memory. I will get to that later. The QPI clock control, the ratio, when you're overclocking, you want to have that at the lowest setting, the 36. Set that to times 36. Now it is at 4.8 gigahertz. The encore and QPI features, when you go into that, you want to have your encore clock ratio 2 times your memory multiplier. So right now we don't know our memory multiplier yet, but we'll come back to this, and we have to make sure to put it 2 times whatever our memory multiplier is. So to see the memory multiplier here, the SPD, you see it's on auto. You want to have that. For now, I would get it to 8. See, 8 multiplier will give us frequency at 1066. Now my memory modules are rated at 1600. The DDR3 1600 megahertz. You know, there's ones that the common ones for the i7 I would recommend are either the 1333, the 1600s, or the 2000 if you have more cash to spend. They're even higher frequency. Now there you can overclock your memory, but I don't really see the need in doing that. My memory comes default with these timings. These are basically timings for the memory. The lower they are, the tighter the timings, the faster the memory runs. But anywhere from 7 to 9, you should be fine. So if you have, you know, I have 77716. You could have, you know, 888 or 999. They're all pretty fairly good. Next thing here we're gonna look at is, okay, so the memory. You have your multiplier set at 8 right now, but then if you start increasing your base clock, the memory will go up as well. Okay, so right now the base clock control is disabled. What I'm gonna do is enable it, and here it is. 133 times 20 gives you 2600, which is the default frequency for the i7. I'm going to type in directly, I'm going to type in 175. See, that already changed my QPI link speed. That also changed my CPU frequency. 20 times 175 will give you 3500, which is 3.5 gigahertz. That's kind of a big step. If you go and, you know, just, you want to make sure to take it a little bit slower than that. So I'm actually going to go 130 here. 130 is the default. I'm gonna go 150, which is the 3.0 gigahertz. So our QPI is at 36, memory is at 8, and that will give you a 1200 frequency, which is actually 400 under our rated speed at 1600, but we'll leave that at 8 for now, because we want to overclock even higher than that. See, if you put this to, you know, 170, one sec here, put this to 180, your memory will go up as well. See it? Now we're at 1440, still not hitting the 1600, but then if you change your multiplier to 10, you're at 1800. See that you're overclocking your memory by now. I'm not overclocking the memory though, I'm overclocking the CPU. So I'm going to leave this at 8 and put this back to 150, which will produce 3.0. You know, that's a pretty nice increase, but we will be overclocking even higher than that. Next thing you want to do is your voltage settings. Your voltage settings are down here for this motherboard. There's the three main ones that you want to worry about. There's even more if you go to the advanced ones, but I have all of those on auto and I've never really had any problems. So the three main ones are the CPU V-core, the QPI / VTT voltage control, and your DRAM voltage, which is your memory. The CPU V-core is by default at 1.25 volts. Since we overclocked a little bit, I'm going to actually bump this a little bit, a couple notches up. Now, I'm going down to 1.20. I'm gonna go to 1.28. Okay. Now that bumps it up 0.300 for the V-core voltage. Your QPI voltage, Intel recommends that you don't go over 1.35, I believe it is. Yeah, see 1.35. I mean, you can, if you're doing like a 4 gigahertz overclock, you might have to go this high. And then if you go even higher, see this is blinking red, means you're gonna die. No, I'm just joking. Your QPI voltage, I'm gonna leave that at actually I'm gonna bump it up a little bit. What is it? It's at 175. I'm gonna bump it up to about 1.2 here. 195 is fine. Just one notch. Should be more than enough. Your DRAM voltage, 1.5 volts right now. If you want to run at the rated speed, I would recommend putting this at 1.64 and leaving it there the whole time. If you go, it's not recommended to go any higher. I've seen people go higher than that, but I don't think you really need to. So 1.64 is basically the standard for your voltage on your memory modules. Okay, these are the basic settings that you're gonna have. Also, I almost forgot to go back to our encore frequency, and that's the one that we have to put double the memory multiplier. So our memory multiplier is 8, so I'm going to set this to 16. It always has to be double, so just remember that. After we're done here, I'm gonna recap what we did again. So our multiplier stays at default. We turned off the power saving features. QPI clock at 36, lowest setting. QPI, your encore, which is double the memory multiplier. Your base clock, that's your basically frequency of the CPU. You're multiplying this by your multiplier, and that gives you your final frequency. Advanced clock control, we have not been here yet. I would leave all this at its default settings as well. This is for your memory, I believe. Turbo